Kevin Knox is a wiry, nimble, 6'9", streaky scoring small forward from Tampa, Florida that starred for the University of Kentucky this past season for John Calipari. I'm sure you've heard of him. He's a mild-natured, quiet, but witty kid that comes from a tight-knit sports family. His mother was a D1 volleyball player at Florida State, and like Vernon Carey, his dad is a football legend in the state of Florida. He served as a big play receiver for Heisman-winner Charlie Ward at Florida State in the early 90s. Charlie Ward would go on to the NBA and play for the New York Knicks, where he'd share a backcourt with Chris Childs, who once punched Kobe Bryant right in the muse cage. Really, there was no reason at all for me to bring up Chris Childs punching Kobe, but I still did. Look at me go! Kevin came to basketball full-time at about the age of 15, where in one weekend he went from almost totally off the radar to a 5-star prospect. Prior to that, he was actually a 3-star dual-threat quarterback prospect until he grew to 6'9", and he likely decided that he would end up a mangled pile of limbs if he brought that size to high-level organized football. I think it was a good choice. Kevin often lists Kevin Durant as his hero, and watching the way that Kevin carries himself on the court, I think that's fairly apparent. I'm sad to report, however, that Kevin Knox is not as offensively talented as Kevin Durant. I nearly burned my vocal cords saying that hot take. But Knox is like Durant in the fact that he's extremely score-first, and he does pose some difficult challenges to opposing defenses. Kevin shows glimpses of elite scoring ability, but he's fairly inconsistent in a variety of ways. He currently gets his dependable offense in two ways. First, catch and shoot. Seeing as Kevin has good size at 6'9" and a nice high release point and a 6'11" and 3/4 wingspan, he makes for a pretty formidable spot-up threat. His release has tightened up and quickened quite a bit since he got to college, and I'm not sure that the percentages that he got in college really reflect where Kevin is as a shooter at this point. He shot 34.1% from 3, 77.4% from the line, and 51% in effective field goal percentage. At Kentucky, you could see that Kevin slowly started to understand what is and is not a good shot over the course of the year. It took until about the midpoint of the season for him to realize that he was settling for some unnecessarily tough threes when he could be getting to the basket.
Now, he has more turnovers than assists based on this play right here. That is a rip to the left and go dunk it. Oh. Wow.
Number 2, floaters and runners. A floater is not always the most welcome sight in the world, but when Kevin Knox is involved, it's actually quite nice. This is probably the most difficult aspect of Kevin's game to defend. When he's being aggressive and attacking, something that he struggled with, across the lane to the right side of the floor, his length and his touch make his floaters deadly. Synergy Sports had Kevin in the 94th percentile shooting runners, scoring about 1.4 points per possession on those shots. Runners are a pretty trademark trait of a bucket getter, and Kevin can hit them, and he does. You can tell that Knox is still adjusting to life on the perimeter because at times he really struggled to create offense solely on his own. Kevin did not play college basketball with a lot of offensive creation around him. He did play with talent, but not creation. It was largely a roster of big forwards that can finish. So this makes you wonder how much the up and down game of the NBA will liberate Kevin's offense going forward. There were also times where I wondered if they were playing through Knox enough. The high watermarks of their season at West Virginia, at Arkansas, Missouri, were the games where Knox's usage rate spiked, and I have to wonder if that's not a coincidence. Because of this and Kevin's own shortcomings creating his own offense, his touches on the perimeter and his trips to the rim often had to be set up by multiple off-ball screen actions. Kentucky had to make a conscious effort to keep him involved. Otherwise, he would have stretches where it seemed like he wasn't impacting the game at all. He shot a huge amount of jump shots off the catch or a single dribble, somewhere else he was really good, and if the defense crowded the catch, he actually did a pretty good job of making reads out of those situations if he couldn't get open. That is, shot faking, gathering himself, making a mid-range shot, or going ahead and getting to the rim. The popular debate that I've observed among NBA fan bases seems to typically involve Kevin Knox, Miles Bridges, and Mikal Bridges. I think there's some key things to consider when you're sifting through the strengths and weaknesses of these guys. Kevin Knox is a distant third behind Miles and Mikal defensively. His anticipation and his motor on defense are both lacking, and he doesn't get his hand on as many balls as he should given his length. That's not to say that he couldn't improve, but Kevin struggles to guard quicker perimeter players at this point. He'll be the least switchable of the three and the least likely to play meaningful playoff type minutes early in his career. Kevin is also the least explosive athlete of the three and the least physical. He doesn't attack the rim like Miles or Mikal, and he's often looking to slide around guys on drives rather than put a tomahawk on somebody's head. Now, the flip side of that is that Kevin is probably the most offensively gifted naturally, and in my opinion has the highest ceiling as a dynamic scorer. I've said in another video that I think Mikal will be a capable shot maker, and I feel largely the same way about Miles, maybe a little less so. But neither guy is as fluid or as shifty a scorer as Knox. And this is something that people might argue with me about, but I think he has the most offensive upside of the three. He's just got a great natural feel. Lastly, and this part could be huge, Kevin is the youngest of the three, by far. He was one of the youngest players in college basketball this past year, and he's one of the youngest in the draft. There's a lot of runway ahead of Kevin as he continues to grow as a player. Would you take a 19-year-old Mikal Bridges over a 19-year-old Kevin Knox? That's a laughable proposition in my opinion, and it's something to think about, and I'm sure teams will. Does Kevin Knox plan on being an elite scorer in the NBA? I think this is an important question. Who is he actually? His marginal to detrimental defensive impact going forward would only really be downplayed if he became such a high-level scorer that you could justify keeping him out there. That said, his appetite for scoring does seem to be a bit at odds with his temperament as a player. Elite scorers in the NBA all seem to have an edge about them. A resilient alpha dog mentality that says, I've got some special shit in this bag and there ain't nothing you can do about it. I would love to see Kevin get a little nastier, but who knows if that'll happen. We've seen glimpses of it. At this point, I see Kevin as a Harrison Barnes type personality, a lot of offensive ability, but a temperament that could keep him in the range of a second to third option on a decent team. That'd be a respectable outcome for Kevin, but it'd be fun to see him stop deferring and go full Walter White.
I am the one who knocks.
To be totally honest, I find Kevin Knox to be an extremely tough call, mainly because his ceiling seems to be directly tied to some of the biggest concerns about his game. I have a hard time seeing Knox as a franchise player or the best player on a playoff team. He doesn't seem to be an alpha male and he's not particularly outspoken, so that edge that you see in elite scores isn't always there. There were times this past season where he definitely could have said, hey, get on my back to his Kentucky teammates, and he either couldn't or wouldn't. Knox isn't just score first, he's score only. And unless he gets that alpha edge, this basically cannot continue to be a thing for him if he wants to be a star in the NBA. He's more or less a high potential specialist at this point, and a specialist that lets his specialty dictate his effort on the other end of the floor if he's not involved, and that has to change. The worst case scenario for a team looking at Knox is that you get a guy who is potentially a negative defender that has to have his number called a lot in order to stay involved in the game. That's not typically how you look to use a top 10 pick. I don't expect that to be Kevin's fate at all, but without evolution in his game, that's certainly on the table. This will be equal parts emotional maturity and staying active on the glass, taking defense personally, and proving that he can create for himself and teammates when it's called for. To me, Kevin's tippy-top ceiling is somewhere in the vicinity of an all-star game or two with a decent team, or a likely third option on a good team. He's a guy that, if he can defensively stay on the floor, can score in a variety of ways when he's at his best. The potential for Kevin to grow into a high-impact player in the NBA is there, but it'll come down to a given team's risk tolerance when deciding whether he's that future all-star or a supporting cast guy that can semi-dependably get you buckets. If their concerns are like mine or more severe, I could see Kevin sliding a bit in the draft. If they see those raw tools and figure that this kid could really grow into something special, they might go ahead and snag him in the 5 to 10 range. As for me, I land somewhere in the middle. While I'm not sure that Kevin will hit that tippy-top ceiling of an all-star game or two, I do think that he'll be a highly qualified secondary option in the NBA for a long time. His offensive ability is pretty undeniable, and his age and upside could be a very high value pick for a team just after the top 10. Let me know if you agree. Thanks. Hey folks, I appreciate you watching, and if you like this video, click the like button and be sure to subscribe. You can also follow me on Twitter at @JKyleMann. Say hey.